let me just jump right into it, because just talking into the whole crypto debate, is that cool if we just jump right into the whole crypto debate? And because I love this concept of what crypto actually means, because I don't know if you've watched the little clip on Joe Rogan. And also, one quick question, is my mic too loud? Because I feel a little bit of an echo. Does it sound okay on your end?
All good.
All good? Okay, just making sure. So I saw this thing Peter Zion said on Joe Rogan when he was talking about he doesn't exactly believe in Bitcoin. And I know there's a lot of people, there's a huge debate between crypto, Bitcoin, and its actual value. Is there any intrinsic value to this commodity? Or is it all just, since it only has a fixed amount, is this basically then, is that a problem with it where we're going to get some sort of people who basically hoard Bitcoin and it's never truly going to grow? It's only going to have people who are going to be these ultra billionaires again, and we're going to kind of then fall into maybe its own same bad system. And I'm going to ask one more question to kind of topple on that, which I thought was interesting, which is then this is getting into a whole nother discussion too, but I think it's going to be, it's around the whole Bitcoin crypto discussion, because I think it's just so, it's going to be about this, where I think talking about the future carbon tax that potentially could happen too, how is this then going to result in the mining of crypto, the transferring of crypto, if depending on, you know, just worst case scenario, powder outages go down and these infrastructures that take so much energy for crypto to be transferred and managed are then broken down? How is this system still going to be potential and in use when all the potential infrastructure could be destroyed, or then we're going to have this potential carbon tax on top of it?
Yeah, awesome. Great question. I'll start with that, and then we can kind of bring it back to the first question. So I guess just kind of disclaimer to begin with, I'm super into crypto, and obviously like that's kind of my work right now and what I do, and I coach people in it, but I'm actually not a giant fan of Bitcoin. So this is kind of what I guess makes me a little different than the average person who's into crypto. I don't hold any Bitcoin. I don't plan on holding any. And I'm not a fan of it for the reasons that you're talking about, partially, which the energy. So let's start with the energy of it. So with Bitcoin, you know, for people that are unfamiliar with it, you have these the validators who are called the miners. So the miners are who are actually support and create the network and allow the network to run. So that's where you may have seen, like, people will have, you know, big rooms, their houses or warehouses full of all these mining rigs. And like you said, they take a bunch of energy because they're literally like computers that are really high powered, you know, devices that require a lot of energy. And the reason they do that is because the consensus mechanism that powers Bitcoin requires these miners to essentially use computing power to run algorithms that then create and mine the blocks that create the blockchain. And with Bitcoin, they incentivize people to do that by then allowing them to create their own Bitcoin. So that's where mining Bitcoin comes from. So basically, these guys will get all of these, you know, computers and rigs together to find the blocks, which then they get rewarded with Bitcoin. And that's the whole reason they do it. And the big issue with that is the energy, like you're saying. So a statistic I've heard is that one Bitcoin transaction can power a home for like a full day or something like that, like ridiculous amounts of power. And so that's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of it, and why I actually I like other projects that don't require that same kind of processing. And so there's projects out there like XRP. Have you heard of XRP before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like, I'm a big fan of XRP. Yeah. That's what I've been guided to, like, spiritually. And we can go deeper into that later. But one of the big differences between XRP and Bitcoin is it's way greener. It doesn't require mining. So you don't actually have all these computer rigs doing it. You still have validators and they still use computers, but they're so much more low maintenance. You don't need to scale and get like warehouses. You can just run it on one computer, and you don't have to there's no financial incentive. So that's one of the things that kind of sets it apart too, is that it can be bad for the network to have a financial incentive to control the network. And so that's one of the issues with Bitcoin, is that there's actually a large centralization in the mining in communist China. So like last year, for instance, in 2021, there were 5 individuals in China who had control over the majority of what are called mining pools. So these mining pools are where Bitcoin miners will get together and they'll create these big pools of basically a team of them, of thousands of people around the world. And the idea is that you're harnessing everyone's mining power so that you have a better chance of basically finding that block and getting paid. But the problem is that the people who run the mining pools end up having all the power. And so you have like this, collective interest that can form amongst different groups that kind of centralize it. And so that's one of the issues we've seen with Bitcoin is essentially if China wanted to, they could attempt to hack and do what's called a 51% attack on the network, and cause some serious issues like fraud, what's called double spending, where you can spend one amount of money twice and things like that. So I'm more of a fan of some of the more modern blockchains that have solved a lot of these issues on both energy and scalability and decentralization in general. And so I guess your other question was about
I know I gave you like 8 questions.
Yeah.
I know.
What was the first one again?
It was kind of talking about the carbon tax. It was talking about the potential. This is also a conversation I think is interesting, just with the mining capabilities of just, since it is, we are breaking, this is also the future conversation, since we're breaking into a cashless society, it's the future model that they keep talking about, is we're going to enter some sort of cashless society soon, and we're going to use some sort of either modern new credit-based system or then this crypto model. It all seems to be oriented towards some sort of cashless society. So I was kind of alluding to that in the future, and how crypto is going to play, I think, a major potentially part in that, if we're going to go to some sort of cashless society, or if we're going to go to some sort of post-world credit system. That I think I think people will, how do I put this? People will, I think there's going to be a lot of people against it, obviously, but I think unfortunately it's just going to kind of happen. I don't see it not happening at this point. I feel like the snowballs unfortunately just kind of rolled too far with COVID and with the weird manipulated current debt market that we have, that we're going to enter some sort of, just the reality is we're going to enter some sort of weird cashless society / we're going to then have, how is crypto then going to kind of flux and pay apart? Is it going to completely subsume that sort of cashless society, or is it going to be kind of the antithetical opposing to this new debt market that's kind of always existed, as like, money's always just been like banknotes. It's never been real. It's always been some theoretical way to give you debt. That's how just kind of the banks work, it's not really real money. It's not an asset. It's just some sort of like figment, but we use it as, this is what you get paid. This is your life insurance policy. These are all your, this is your retirement. This is all it's all just still this construct that we've used. It's not, it's not real. It's not like you're really trading 4 cows for your new Corolla or something, So it's how is that then going to play? Because I love that there's that argument for crypto, but I think really, really interesting argument, or not argument, just conversation to have, is how is crypto then going to play in the future market? Is it really going to be something really prevalent in the future? And how is it going to play with this new cashless society that's just for better or worse seeming like it's going to happen?
Yeah. So what I kind of, one of the things that I go over with my students is how the evolution of value in energy exchange has evolved over time. And, going all the way back to like the traditional barter systems, like you're talking about, like 2 cows for a chicken or some seashells, like that was kind of the most pure version of an energy exchange, right?
Yeah.
Like you could say back in native times, or even if you're saying like Lemurian, kind of those kind of times, like it was more raw and like just physical and real. And then that kind of evolved into like precious metals, and then, gold and silver coins. So now you could have precious metals, but they were mobile. So you could, have a bag of coins that you take with you, and it's kind of like cash, right? But actually the value's with you. And then, the banks came around later, and the banks were like, hey, we'll take your gold and silver. Don't worry about it. We'll hold it for you, and you just come get it when you need it, right? And then they made bank notes, and that's where we got cash, right? So now, oh, you don't need your gold and silver. We'll hold that for you. You just take this cash, and this represents your gold and silver, and you come get it anytime. And that worked at the time. But then what happened? Like, we got taken off that gold standard, and then fractionalized reserve banking happened, where the banks don't even have to hold what they say they should have. So if a bank is supposed to have, I don't know, like $10 billion, we'll just throw a number out there, they can have fractional reserve banking where they only have to have 10% of that or less. And, they could loan out to their clients 10 times more than they actually own, pretty much. And so that really took us away from like the financial sovereignty, one of what our value even meant. Now we were with these, these banknotes, these dollars, these paper currencies that weren't backed by anything. And they didn't even, have what so then we went digital, right? And then there's not even enough banknotes to back what they have digitally. So first they took us away from the gold with the banknotes, and then they took us away from the banknotes with the digital systems. And like you're saying now, everything being digital, somebody on the back end could change your bank account. If they have the right access in the bank, they could change what you owe or what your balance is with just a couple keystrokes, right? If they were corrupt or something.
Some little bug could, completely destroy or manipulate someone's, entire financial security. You know what I mean? Just some mistake could completely upend a lot of things. So
exactly. And then they can freeze it. They can decide what you can and can't spend it on. Like we saw with the truckers in Canada, like they had their accounts frozen. People in Russia and the Ukraine have had their accounts frozen. So we're really getting to this point now where people are really realizing how money is a representation of our spiritual energy, right? It's like a physical manifestation of the non-physical energy that we cultivate. And when they can exert pressure over that, they can control you. And a lot of our freedoms today, especially in the United States, hinge on the freedom of finances, meaning that, we have our basic freedoms like freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms, and a lot of other stuff. But a lot of those, you need access to money, fair access to money, like being able to buy a bus ticket to go to the protest, or being able to buy a firearm. Like you need to be approved for that, basically financially. And if they can control it and stop it there, then they can prevent you from properly expressing your other most basic freedoms. And I think that that's been their plan. So I see us at this pivotal point, bringing it full circle to your question, where we are getting exposed to this new decentralized blockchain technology. And this has the opportunity to send us in a really dark direction or in a really positive direction. And I think, in the dark direction, a lot of people are probably more familiar with that because it's the risks have been made more, aware to people, where we could have a totalitarian kind of society where everything is controlled, yada, yada. On the flip side, on the positive side, it's giving us back sovereignty over our finances. So we're already digital, right? Like everybody's already using a credit card, a debit card. Most people have their savings digitally. They don't have it in like cash under their mattress or in gold or silver.
Yeah.
So what blockchain is
Yeah.
doing is it's allowing us to like take control over our energy again and
Mhm.
reclaim it like sovereignly and kind of get us back to the roots of like what gold and silver and the barter system were supposed to be and what the banks ended up perverting and taking from us. So with that too, like, you know, on the dark timeline, I think that looks like one currency that does everything. Like that would be the NWO timeline, like, you know, a one world currency that they can
Yeah.
control, they can track all that. But in the positive side, what we're going to see is like an ecosystem of currencies. So instead of one coin doing everything, we'll have an ecosystem where, just like kind of in a healthy version of capitalism, you don't have a monopoly, but you have fair competition that encourages, like, you know, lots of different groups. And as, you know, consumers or whatever, we have options on who we want to go to for what we want to buy and things like that. But if
Mhm.
there's a monopoly, that's when there's a big power struggle and a concern. So yeah, does that answer?
Yeah. No, yeah, it totally does. I think I'm just really honestly being completely transparent. I'm pretty freaked out with the um kind of communist model where we have some sort of, the communist Chinese model where we have some sort of fully um system where, in China, if you literally have like I forgot, like a personal credit rating where if you smoke out in public, if you're late to your train or on your job or something like that, if you do these social things that they don't approve of, then you can completely your social credit score, but the name eluded me. But to have this social credit score system really does terrify me. And thinking, going into also what you said about timelines, um, yeah, I really, that is something that really does freak me out because the potential timeline I feel like could go so bad. Part of me thinks we can't go on that timeline because it's too overt, where usually it's for millennia has been, or for a long time has been so covert with the kind of Masonic, very Freemason kind of dollar bill looking system we've used, or the other systems kind of, it hasn't been this public freedom of information where we can just know and see kind of what they're doing. So there is kind of this positive flip side to it where I feel, okay, they couldn't really do the China thing in the US, at least now, you know what I mean? I feel like we're still kind of away from that. And thinking also to this and thinking about timelines too, I'm really, I think, also inspired by that Peter Zion interview on Joe Rogan, because he was talking about how China's going to fail by 2030 and how Russia is currently not doing good in Ukraine. And I feel
Mm.
like this is all interconnected, even though we're talking about money and Bitcoin and oh, the dollar bill has Mason stuff on it, but like this is still connected to world politics, geopolitics, and the value of energy and how energy is being transferred. And I think that's what's so interesting about money, because it really is. That's what money is, and that's how things are getting interplayed. And also with the new introduction of AI and everything then being, I'm doing a lot of different topics. So if you want to jump in on one of the things, because I'm just kind of spinning right now, but also the introduction of AI come into the factor of truckers, minimum wage jobs, all these kind of, working class things that people did for most of American history. And there's the classic, it's so funny where it's like The Simpsons, the guy just has a regular paying job and he could support his kids and had a big house and go on vacations all the time. Now that's unthinkable for millennials or then, Gen Z. It's unthinkable to even have that sort of lifestyle where you could have a house and 4 kids, and that American lifestyle is completely gone. And we're morphing into this super debt society that I'm concerned with, very concerned with. But also I find it interesting too, then, the projected collapse of society, where we see it almost culturally. We see this I feel social degeneration kind of in the West, but also then the literal, there is just not going to be enough people to take care of the elderly. Simultaneously, AI is taking over everything, and everything's going to be these automatons, where all the jobs that were very just technique based, where it's just you're just doing something in a very technical way, and it can be done soon as AI can basically take it over. What does this world look like? Where are we? And again, this is a very like 1984 kind of dark interpretation, but I also feel like we can't go full dark, but there's always the dark and the light, interplaying with it. But I feel that we're going to enter some sort of weird 2020s, the projection of how the economy is going to look throughout 2020. And then I'm just saying too many things for you to. I'm like, please interject. So
no, I'm just waiting.
Topic. But just how the 2020s are going to look, because I feel like in 2030 it's been almost psychically projected by whatever you want to call the elites, people, and then the cultural society. Where when you say, oh, by 2030, it almost leaks in my mind that there's a lot of just populism or other people, or from every, from left, blue and red, and every people that, okay, there's going to be something projected in 2030 that there's going to be some sort of collapse. And we're seeing that causal rotation right now with just population and the economy. How does then crypto work in this world where, how does anything, do we just go then to a complete barter system after 2030, or do we enter this complete cashless society? And I think I wanted to really then get more, there's kind of like the veneer of, okay, this could happen, but really on the timeline you see, what's think the best case scenario versus on that timeline, if that makes sense? Like what can we do as people? What can we do now? How do you see the timeline kind of playing out by like mid 2030, because there's so much projected bad kind of coming, and from the economy failing to all these sort of things. How do we prepare ourselves for this future thing? I think I'm almost asking, projecting my own self, where I'm asking you, like, how do we prepare ourselves for this? Because I kind of think like, okay, this is really, it's almost too much when you kind of think about it, where you think about, okay, this cashless society is really collapsing. China's, going to completely collapse. If they're getting in, this Ukraine, that I brought up Russia and Ukraine, because that's affecting the economy too. That affects the EU, because if Ukraine falls and if Russia then keeps pushing, or if they don't, this is totally going to affect NATO and the EU. We're in some sort of proxy war with, NATO/Russia. And then the whole Hong Kong thing. How does this play out, and how does then we don't get completely subsumed into some sort of evil, cashless society if the economy crashes? And also, I think I just want to bring up a lot of topics so I don't forget too, but also then food. How does food play a part in this new financial system if, everyone has noticed that food production has fluctuated with COVID? How does then future food production not completely play a factor in the value of the current economy? I know I said like 80. But any one of those things you want to jump up? You want to go straight into Ukraine, straight into one of those?
So what I'll say is I first off, I feel like we are living in the best time to be alive in human history. And that might be something that people are like, what? Like, how is, like, this seems like the worst time to be alive to some people maybe, but I genuinely think that the experience, the catalyst experience that we have available to us right now, and what we're the way that the tides are turning and the tables are turning, and that we can have an impact on the future, has never been as prevalent and potent as it is right now. And you mentioned how, like, in the kind of collective consciousness and in the news and everything, this 2030 timeline, they're putting that out there a lot. So you got to ask why. Like, what do they want? Well, clearly they want that timeline, right? They want that timeline that they're trying to make us think is inevitable, which is the collapse of society, the Klaus Schwab, you will own nothing and you'll be happy about it, making you afraid of cashless society, making us afraid of AI. I think a lot of these things are inevitabilities in the human experience, at least the human experience we've chosen as a collective so far, like AI, cashless, these kind of things, more digital-based systems. But I think that we, like with anything in life, we can't control what happens to us, but we can control the way that we react to it and that we respond to it, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel very similarly about it, where I feel like a lot of these things are inevitable, but we have the choice on what we're going to make it and what we're going to do with it. And so that's why I think they want us to be so afraid of these things, because they want to program into us that that's what we're going to create. So the more that they can convince us, hey, this is what the future looks like, you're going to own nothing, you're going to be miserable, be scared of AI, be scared of all these things. Like, not saying that there's not some truth to those things. Like, we should definitely be discerning of AI and a lot of these things. But a lot of it, I think, is this predictive programming model where they're creating the timeline they want to see, using us as the manifestors to create their timeline. So the more that we can focus on the timeline that we want to see and take actions toward that every day, the more we'll literally just create it and their timeline will become irrelevant. Mm-hmm. So going into some of these other topics that you're talking about, like let's talk about like China and the social credit system. Yeah. So, the main difference between what China's doing and, like, say, blockchain, for instance, they're both digital currencies, but China is using a completely centralized, programmable, controlled digital currency. So it's a digital currency, but it's not a blockchain. And that's an important distinction, because the blockchain itself is the factor that makes it decentralized and by the people for the people in most situations. That's why China doesn't want to use it. They want something that they can completely control, they can track, they can take people's money, they can freeze it, they can do all this stuff that they can do at the banks, but on a whole different level. And so that's what we have to be discerning of and watchful for. And that's kind of coming in the discussion around what are called central banking digital currencies, or CBDCs. Have you heard that term before?
No, I haven't.
So CBDCs, central banking digital currencies, they're basically the central bank's programmed digital money. And they could be like China's, or they could be more decentralized. What it's looking like now is that a lot of these CBDCs are being piloted and tested on blockchains. So that's what's particularly interesting, is that they could go the route of creating a totally private, controlled digital asset like China. But instead, what we're seeing is that they are building them on top of these already existing decentralized platforms. And, why is a good question. We don't know exactly why, but it's better for us because we can position ourselves to work with the assets that these platforms are being built on, instead of being stuck with the CBDC. So take XRP, for instance. XRP is basically the center point of what I would call like the new quantum financial system. And that's I kind of see the quantum financial system as being the equal and opposite to the Great Reset. So the Great Reset being that dark Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum timeline that we want to try to avoid. The quantum financial system being the equal and opposite, where it will be that ecosystem of currencies instead of one doing everything. It'll be decentralized. It'll be powered by the people for the people, and it'll bring us into this new era of wealth and prosperity that we were so limited and controlled in before. It's kind of like I picture the economy as like a tourist field. And right now, the economy is a sick tourist field. It's like got parasites in it. It's got restrictions and bottlenecks, and it's not flowing like a healthy organism as a reflection of our spiritual energy like it should be. And so what we want to do is take those parasites out. And that's what I see this system doing. because a lot of the decentralization cuts out the middleman. So it cuts out things like brokers, like banks, like anybody that would get in between you and direct access to your finances and your investments and things like that. And so I think that what we're entering is honestly going to be the biggest wealth transfer and opportunity that the planet has ever seen. And by wealth transfer, I mean that there's going to be massive amounts of wealth that are redistributed through this changing of the system. And have you ever heard of like Nasara Jasara before? You heard that term?
No, I haven't.
So in the 90s, there was this legislation that was created by people in Congress, I think, and it was called NASARA, and it stood for the National Economic Safety and Reformation Act. And it was basically legislation to like redo the financial system. So they were going to get rid of income tax. They were going to have debt forgiveness. There was going to be like a form of universal basic income. It was going to be like all these things that there's a lot of discussion around now, but this was supposed to happen back in the 90s. And it was right before 9/11 happened. So it's like 9/11 happened. And literally that was the day that it was supposed to take effect. And then, you know, what happened. And like, they really distracted from all that and probably purposely tanked that timeline.
Yeah.
So we're kind of getting energy.
That's such a can of worms, I know. But yeah,
right?
yeah. I know that's such an interesting yeah, it's gonna get me off on a tangent about 9/11, but yeah, that's very interesting that I just happened to be on that date.
And I don't know if you saw, but like this past week, they've been talking about in the government abolishing the IRS and getting rid of income tax, like officially, like on an actual legal level.
Wow.
It was something they were going to vote on this week, I believe. And so we're actually seeing this like come up as a real conversation, where it used to just kind of be conspiracy theory, like, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of the IRS and income tax, like that'll ever happen, right? So that's going to be part of this shift, and potentially forms of debt forgiveness. But the main transfer of wealth, I believe, is going to happen in those who are investing in the different aspects of the new financial system. And what I'm seeing is like, you know, having worked with people for a couple years on this and like coaching them and stuff, there's been this phenomenon that I've noticed of you could say like conscious or awakened or spiritual oriented people who are being guided to this whole blockchain space right now, and particularly towards XRP, which is really interesting. And that's how I kind of started my journey, because I was like very kind of opposed to like Bitcoin, and I just didn't get a good vibe about it. It didn't feel right to me, so I never really dove into it. And then somebody told me about XRP one day, and it came up in a very synchronistic set of circumstances. And then I was getting synchronicities about it everywhere. And I was like listening to the universe, and I was like, okay, I get it. There's something here. So I invested in it. I got some. And then it was like months later that my guides were like, okay, that's good that you followed through with it, but you need to know why. Like, you need to understand the reason behind what you're doing and what this, change in the global financial system is. And that's what really took me down the rabbit hole. And that's when I realized that like XRP and a bunch of these other projects are really like going to be freeing people and creating this transfer of wealth, where ordinary people have the opportunity to come into like massive amounts of wealth by investing in these systems before they like basically pop off and become mass adopted. Yeah. And so watching people getting guided to this, I'm like, there's some divine order to this. Like, there's a reason that I'm seeing so many people that identify as starseeds or empaths or healers that are like feeling guidance toward this. And they're all saying the same thing. Like, yeah, I didn't feel great about crypto. Then I learned about this, and some guidance in me was just like, there's something there. That's the one. So I think that what we're seeing is that, what my theory is that the people who are destined and fated to change the planet, who have the ability to change the planet, are being guided to come into massive amounts of wealth so that they can actually be the catalyst for the change that we've been waiting for so long. So, for so long, like we've externalized all this change. Like we've hoped that, a president or a politician or a government or a corporation or ETs even would come down and like save us and do it for us. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I believe that, there are higher plans working behind the scenes, but at the same time, I don't think that anyone's coming to save us. Like, I think that we are our own saviors and that we're being given and will continue to be given the tools that we need to change the planet in God's image, basically, and do God's work while we're here, but doing it ourselves, not like praying for someone else or some other entity
to just solve it for us, and we don't have any sort of true empowerment. We're just like, oh, help us, alien, and then they just show up and no, it's I can definitely relate to that, and I feel that there was that I can definitely relate a lot to that. With they getting into definitely the more spiritual conversation is that they want us to do kind of the work ourselves before they show up. From if we're talking about aliens and stuff like that, or angels or whatever you want to call them, even though I totally believe they're the same thing. There's just how you perceive it and what you've known, and like, oh, but I think the higher power definitely wants us, and we talked about earlier that money's energy. So if we get kind of the energy to kind of compensate for, people trying to take advantage of the financial system or whatever, this is a way to counterbalance it. And I definitely feel on a spiritual note that, and even emotionally feeling out, Bitcoin, and just, again, no objective reason for it, but just I can definitely relate to that. The people who I know who are into XRP are kind of on the same spiritual wave, you could say.
Wave.
Who they're definitely they definitely get it. I think then once then I think maybe what we could then get into is the financial system with, I just also want to get your kind of thoughts on food production, with something I'm noticing and slightly concerned about with the cost of food and how food has been so clearly paramount to, I think, and also, living in Arizona. I guess, sorry if I could say, I'll take that out. I was like, wait a second, I don't want to give your state location.
That's all good.
So, but in Arizona, there's a lot of like water issues. Obviously, it's a drier state, it's desert, but there's a lot of I noticed that there can be some, there's in all states, in California and in a lot of states, things have been segmented out where for certain agricultural reasons, part of the land's been destroyed, or other things have been destroyed. And just getting your thoughts, I guess, on how is then XRP, crypto, and the new financial system coming going to affect food? Because we know, just being very blunt with it, people say, oh, Bill Gates has bought in all these farmlands, and we've seen the cost of food go up so exponentially. Thinking, if money's energy, how, and then obviously food is energy for people too, how is this then going to affect so much of, I feel, the future timeline and the future financial system? Because I've noticed personally, diet, food is also energy too, and manifesting our energy in a right way, again, saying the word right, right or wrong, but managing our energy in this new financial system, I feel, has been purposefully, I think we've purposefully over-farmed with this financial system to try to maximize profits. And I think that's kind of what I'm kind of alluding to with this, is in the new financial system, and hopefully the best timeline possible, I feel like it's a much more balanced, healthier diet. And how is then, but there's that, I think, angle too. But then in the just the unfortunate reality of the current system we're in, a lot of the land and a lot of the agriculture and just water has been kind of subsumed and overtaken from what should naturally be occurring in nature.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love that connection because health is wealth, right? Like health is the number one wealth over really anything else. Because if you don't take care of your health, if you don't eat right, if you don't put good things in your body, then it's going to fail you. It's going to, you're not going to be able to live the life you want. Even if you have physical money, if you have poor health, it's not going to be worth it. So I think definitely one of the biggest parts of this whole shift, greater than just financially, but the whole, you could say the ascension that Earth is going through on a collective level, a big part of that is going to be food. And that doesn't mean like, any of these super strict diets like veganism or carnivore or keto or anything in particular. I mean, some of those things I think do work great for certain people. And I've experimented with myself with that. But I think overall, the most important thing with food and health is just putting things that are actually food into our body, which sounds obvious, right? Like,
Yeah,
you should eat food, right? But like the majority of people are still eating all this processed junk and, sugars and wheats and super carb heavy, like things that we know are weighing down and causing issues. So I think and I love this question, the way that the financial shift will impact that world. What comes to mind is like the people that I work with, everybody seems to have an idea of what they want to do to change the world with the wealth that they're going to be generating. And it's part of this idea of like manifesting too, like figure out, have a plan for what you're going to do to kind of call it in more and make it more of a reality. And so a lot of people want to create some kind of sustainable agriculture, sustainable society, sanctuary type places for healing and regeneration, and food's going to be a big part of that. So what I see happening is like the mass production on all levels slowing down, which we're already seeing. Like I don't know if you heard, but like this past year, a bunch of the factory farm meat warehouses were like mysteriously getting burned to the ground. Like and people were kind of correlating it with, like you said, Bill Gates buying up farmland and potentially being a part of that timeline. Like maybe the dark is doing that, but also I think just in general that factory farming on all levels is going to have to move towards a more localized direction. So what I think we're going to see is that there's going to be more of an emphasis on sustainably generating food in your community and in your area. And this is something that I think scientists have found too, that we, not just genetics, but where we live, that if we eat food from where we live, even if we're not genetically from there, eating food from your area does so much better for your body rather than sourcing something from the other side of the planet. And it's like there's a pattern with the way that the consciousness and the genetics of the food and everything line up, where food in the location eaten by the people there just does so much better for the systems. And so that's what I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see kind of shifts away from mass agriculture, moving towards community-based agriculture, sustainable communities, things like farmers markets, and increase of that kind of stuff. And also just like farming your own food. Like I think more people will find value in having a private garden and realizing that most people, even if you're in an urban area, you could have like a hydroponic setup or something indoors even, where you can generate a large portion of your food, especially like leafy green vegetables and things like that are easy to grow. And you're able to put your energy and everything into them. So when you can like love your food as it's growing, like that's a whole relationship too, where you're talking to the plants as they're growing, or even if it's like, farm animals that are, you're going to consume later, like having them be local, giving them love, like giving them a good life, plant or animal. That's what makes such a fundamental difference. So I think that the financial shift is going to like enable people to actually do that, because most people, if you ask them, they'd be down to do that, but it's the money and the time commitments and all these little variables that they're like, oh, it's easier to just go to the grocery store and, you know, get what I need. So, and I'm included in that. Like I go to the grocery. I'm not
Yeah,
growing
yeah, yeah. You don't have like a whole herd of cows and goats
yeah,
and stuff.
right.
Yeah, yeah. And a
But
barn.
like one day that
No,
would be great. Like that's what I'd like
yeah.
to. I'd love to have like a farm or something where I can grow, you know, what I need for myself and my family and my community.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, more people are going to value that moving into the future.
Same. I think, the one thing I am looking forward to, if, the whole system does crash, is then becoming this like agricultural nomad. It's kind of like I see like memes sometimes like, hey, why doesn't everything just crash already? So then I can go back to like being a hunter gatherer and, kind
Yeah.
of going back to those, Paleolithic Pleistocene times or whatever, where we're just like hunting and gathering, because in a sense it, is going to be a lot more, connected to nature. But
yeah, and even if people aren't forced into that from like a crash, which could happen, but even if that doesn't happen, like people will just want to do it because they're gonna feel, pardon my French, they're gonna feel shittier and shittier like the more that they eat things that aren't food. It's getting harder.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think collectively, and I think this is then also broaching on a big, because I was saying like just like but I think collectively as a planet, because I definitely feel we're all interconnected. Like any person who has ever lived and you are in this matrix that we call Earth. You know what I mean? So no matter what, there is this interconnectedness that if someone's consuming very, has a poor diet, poor health that we unfortunately see, it's still in the matrix of reality affecting everyone. And also then the literal earth that we're over farming, or kind of how they do it in Brazil, how they'll just kind of burn out the Amazon, and how they can destroy it, and they'll just put sand out, and then they'll over farm, and then they'll just burn all the forests and stuff like that. And then we also see the plastics in the ocean. Like collectively, I feel like we know that that's so wrong, obviously, and people just go with it because that's just you just kind of sink into it and become, unfortunately, somewhat of an automaton. Thinking about AI, I think people just kind of force into it because that's just the system that's been put in place, like you said, where even though, I don't have a farm yet, and I'd love to in the future, if I get tons of XRP and it goes up, and I'm going to build a farm. But getting the highest quality food possible, I think, is so important too, because one of my favorite quotes from Sadhguru is saying that oranges, I think it's either 6 or 8, they have 6 or 8 times less nutrients that they did like 100 years ago. So like an orange now, you need to have like 8 oranges or 6 oranges. It was one of those numbers that sounds ridiculous, that the same amount of like vitamin C and all the vitamins that are in an orange 100 years ago, you have to get 8 oranges now to get the same amount of nutrients. So we're not even really eating the same nutrient dense foods. So that's no wonder there's such an obesity crisis, and there's so much health issues, because your gut's been overworking, and then it just creates inflammation and like an insulin response constantly. And that's, I think, the main thing I've noticed too. And I love how you brought up too, because I was a little afraid that you were going to be like, we're all going 100% vegan in the future. I'm like, no, no, because I've noticed too, because I used to be a little bit like that, where I was like 100% vegetarian. And I think I was just going through more of a cleanse, because I've noticed, kind of studying a little bit what Paul Chek says and Taoism, and because you can eat meat in those things, and just studying all cultures, like in Buddhism and Hinduism, meat's definitely not consumed as much, depending on those things, and it can get kind of touchy thinking about it. But and in other, in those kind of religions where there's strict diet restrictions, but I feel that going from fasting, dieting has been, like, I think one of the biggest spiritual experiences, transformations that I've gone through, because it just forces you to, and again, people could like to conflate the word with toxins, and then that's a way to kind of, that, people will say, oh, that you're getting rid of toxins, which you are, but I think then people will kind of scoff at that, saying, oh, those then aren't real things, because you're just creating something imaginary and you're using this word toxins. But it really is what it is like glyphosate. I mean, these are known chemicals they've sprayed on with pesticides and the over antibiotics they put into animals, or the all the excess just stuff they do to cows to keep them, and also the happiness of the animal too. That's something you brought up too that I love, that I 100% believe in, and almost personally experienced know to be true, because I've eaten certain like meat and I'll know just instinctually if this animal is happy or not,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like this weird, horrible thing when I was, I guess, just personally divulging something where throughout, I think it was high school, like 10th grade, I had to take off like a couple months of school. Basically, I was off and on school because I had such bad gastral issues that I'm still kind of dealing with now, doing Chinese medicine and stuff like that. And it's finally then made a very good progression. But what it was the animals were in such torment and eating such bad things. They'll just feed them corn. It's basically like that collectively you're still psychically connected to that cow, especially if you're consuming it. And I remember there's been psychics when they go past like these factory farm things, and and you can feel it too. There's this sad, like kind of dark energy around it. It's kind of like a muckier kind
And
of
they
swamp.
smell so bad, especially the ones in
Yeah.
California. Like
Oh,
literally, have
dude.
you ever buy like the California like factory farms where there's thousands of cows in the desert with like no shade, and it just
Oh
like
no.
it smells like death. It's like
Yeah.
the worst. Like it feels so
Yikes.
bad for those animals.
Yeah. No, I know. So it's one of those hard issues where that's, I think, one of the things that I'm actually looking forward to connecting to this financial system, is that the happiness of animals, you can almost, I think, that relief of factory farming, because there's, I think, so many, I mean, I don't even know, I'm not even going to guess, or I know how many, cows or chickens or, have been eaten just in this year, just already in 2023, it's only 12 days in. It's like
Yeah.
how many cows have already been killed and suffered, and unnecessarily, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying let's go some, super vegetarian utopia type thing. I think meat production, we're omnivores, whatever, that's going into then another conversation. But I think it's still important. But I think the critical thing is the health of the animal, because you're just then going to subsume that karma, that energy, and then you're just going to repeat it out into our physical world. So all the people saying this is just made up, you're literally taking in that energy, consuming it, and then dishing it out into society. And I feel like that karma still relays. If you're eating something that was sad, you're taking it in, and then your cells literally take that energy in and then duplicate, so then you're taking on that sadness too. And I've noticed that there's been a huge difference in the amount of just, every aspect of in Buddhism, it's funny I'm talking about eating meat, but in Buddhism, it's an omnidirectional growth of the Eightfold Path. It isn't just like one thing you learn and I've solved no wrong action. I've solved no. It's this omnidirectional thing you're always trying to improve upon, and I feel like that's something that's really gonna, I think, help society too, because I feel like a lot of our health and then wealth is also health too, like you brought up too, that this is clearly interplayed into, I feel so much of people's then, there's just so much, unnecessary suffering in the relation to having health in relating to money and quality of life, that we've created this financial system on. Because again, we're just talking about money here, but it really is, okay, how much, what the food you've created, then it encompasses everything around our lives. It's encompassing too much to where now, we can't sustain ourselves with stuff that actually has proper micronutrients, because everything's been destroyed with all there's no micronutrients in food left. And you're wondering, okay, what actually, people are just you have to take so many supplements now because all the food we eat. So, there's no micronutrients in any of it, which is crazy when you think about it. But I think
Well, that's the problem with like most people. I feel like most of their diets are grains, and
Yeah.
that's like the thing we don't need the most. like it is food. It's still at least naturally grown from the ground, but
Yeah.
we don't need grains to survive. They have very little nutrients and micronutrients.
Mhm.
So I find that like diet wise, the biggest thing for people, whatever diet they choose, is in cutting out the grains. And then a big part of that is like you're saying the glyphosate. Like
Yeah.
if you go to Italy, from what I've heard,
I was just no, yeah. I'm just thinking.
yeah,
I literally was thinking, are you gonna bring up Italy right now? 'Cause
like
that's what
everyone who
everyone
goes
always
to
brings up when they
Italy,
like. I went to Europe, and then they say like, yeah, the glyphosate.
yeah,
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
can
yeah.
eat the pasta there and feel pretty good, but then
Mhm.
you come back here and you eat it and you feel like you're bloating and dying and like all this stuff. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because why has everyone always then become gluten free all of a sudden? You know what I mean? Isn't that kind of no one brings this up where, in terms of Chinese medicine, I see a lot of people with what's called spleen deficiency qi, where you're talking, this is getting into Chinese medicine and Taoism, Chinese theory. The spleen is connected to the stomach in Chinese medicine, and it's connected to grounding, it's connected to earth. It's very interesting to me that everyone has these specific diets and stomach problems, and everyone's also gone gluten-free. And especially in the US too, I've noticed it more, because in Europe, you can eat it and they don't experience these problems. And it's very interesting that the scientific community has kind of ignored this, seemingly intentionally, because it's too obvious to, if you actually look at it and say, hey, look at all the chemicals we spray on our bread here versus their bread, and there's a clear difference between people having stomach issues, people having, if you look at them from a Chinese medicine perspective, their spleen deficiency, or there's so it's I just find it so interesting where and then you talk about the American diet where we're taking on, so I just find it, yeah, fascinating. I feel like you're right. Grain and American bread has been weirdly the bane of a lot of people's misfortune. When
mhm.
you think about it, and you're going, huh, yeah. And
It's funny that you bring up spleen chi deficiency too, because that was a big theme for me this past year in really diving into that and understanding it. Because I
wow.
felt like the time period where I was going vegan a couple years ago, it sounds like similar happened to you, but it really messed up my gut. I had a lot of issues after going vegan because for what I ended up learning is there's very few people that can tolerate that diet long term. Some people I think are more biologically, genetically geared toward being able to do that, but for a
Hmm.
lot of people, eating especially raw vegan, raw uncooked vegetables and cold foods can be really hard on the spleen and
Yeah.
causes spleen qi deficiency as well as what they call dampness in Chinese medicine. And a lot of people are going around with that. And then 3, 4 years into being vegan, they're like, oh, like I have this pain on my left side next to my stomach, or I get bloating, like things don't feel right. Um,
Hmm.
and it's because the spleen is like getting overloaded. The spleen really likes warm, cooked, slightly sweet, sometimes foods that it can easily digest and work with, like stews and cooked veggies and meats and things like that. So that was like a big thing for I didn't even know really like that my spleen existed. Like, of course I knew of the spleen, but I had almost forgot where it was. I like didn't know what it did. And then all this stuff really brought it to the surface for me. And this past year, I've been like really going on this journey of being in touch with my organs and like knowing where each of my organs are, how they're doing in any moment, like what they need, what they're feeling, what the emotions are that are stuck there and all that stuff. And I think that's a big for anyone that's trying to go down that path of like health and figuring out what diet is best for them, meditating on your organs and like the emotions in them, because our organs store emotions, especially like the liver.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people, with drinking, of course, too, but will get liver issues because of the emotions that are stored there and everything. So tapping into that, meditating on that, I think is a great start for anyone that's trying to go down that path.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's interesting that we both had that same I had it in a different way, but that we both had that same organ deficiency, and that's unfortunately I see it common now that people have this spleen deficiency. So it seems, and the spleen in the stomach in Chinese medicine is the same thing. It's they're kind of more correlated to one another, but it's spleen. It's just Yeah, going raw vegan, I think, and I noticed that too, going vegetarian, there was, yeah, it's just too hard on your spleen, basically. Or
Mhm.
for me, I don't have the genetics where I can sustain that type of diet,
Mhm.
unfortunately. But I definitely think, yeah, yeah. I definitely think that the it all interplays with how you're able to make money, your happiness, your focus. It's unfortunate that I feel people have been suppressed because of food, especially. And yeah, and you also brought up the liver too. Alcohol is a huge thing that I actually just kind of avoid now. It's kind of funny. Like I do very like Muslim things. Like I don't drink. I don't eat pork. Like that's one of the meats that I do try to avoid because I have never found good pork that I feel happy on.
Yeah, same.
Um,
You have to be
interesting, right?
really particular with pork. Like that's the one that I feel like has to be the cleanest, the most organic, the best raised, and even then, it's like it can be kind of questionable. I have a theory on this that like pigs and humans share a ton of genetic material, like to
Hmm.
the point where they've even experimented moving organs from pigs to humans, which
Oh yeah.
that's kind of a whole thing within itself. But I feel like that pigs were my fun theory is that pigs were some kind of Atlantean genetically created experiment that had
Hmm.
human DNA for whatever reason. I don't know if it was for eating or what, but like I don't know how familiar you are with like Atlantis and research around that, but a lot
No,
of
I'm fine with if we just got we want to end really hard and just go full like let's have a little like 20-minute conspiracy, like go full conspiracy theory hour. I'm for it. I'm for it. Enough
yeah.
about banking and having XRP. Let's go Atlantis and Lemuria and different timelines and portals and stuff like that. I'm good.
I just bring it in full circle,
Yeah,
it's all the same
yeah,
world for me.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
no, me too.
so I
But
feel
yeah.
like in Atlantis there was a lot of um, chimera experiments,
Mhm.
right? Like hybrid experiments that were going on. They were testing the limits of like genetic experimentation and combining genetics in a way that was hurtful to the human experience, I think, and kind of not in alignment with God, you could say.
Yeah.
And I almost feel like pigs are like one of those, like the fact that we're so similar genetically, it feels intuitively to me like that they were created, and that the reason why so many world religions say don't eat pigs could be because they were literally created with human genetics. And maybe there's an interaction that goes on there when we consume it that is almost similar to cannibalism in a way,
Mhm.
where it might have like a detrimental effect on our bodies and our genetics in some way, in the same way
Yeah.
that being a cannibal would. So I don't know, that's my random fun theory, because so many cultures are like don't eat pigs, right? Like so many Muslims, Jews, like so many different groups.
Yeah, no, I feel that it's weird how it's become this forbidden animal and people don't know why. Like there's no like there's this one guy called Let's Talk Religion where he's like, I don't know why the pig became so um and they do have this weird quality about them that they are so genetically close to us. And then we're getting on this kind of conspiracy theory thing too, where we're talking about Atlantis. Um, and I think I've yeah, I think there definitely can be, well, okay. So I definitely think we're a hybrid civilization, how you're talking about when we're talking about um Atlantis. I think for sure it's kind of a weird conversation to have where you are in this kind of weird creationist pool, but I think we're definitely a hybrid civilization of some sort where we could either call us some sort of, we're all different hybrid alien races, or they were doing genetic engineering and we're some sort of amalgamation of that. I do think that that's basically true. I think that basically happened. When we're talking about Atlantis and conspiracy theories and pre-flood times on how that was all going down.
Yeah.
I think with the research Graham Hancock's done, it's definitely pretty evident that there was a Atlantis civilization, but this is just kind of fun, we're going off kind of the rails. And I think the book there's a really good YouTube video about one of the guys that Nikki's interviewed, where his name's Jason Rezadrajani. And he basically has very interesting memories about Atlantis and about that there were these kind of, and a lot of people have too, it's not just him, where, Edgar Casey's envisioned the, end of Atlantis. And I guess I'll divulge this. I'm a little, I don't know, it feels exposing, but it feels like very exposed when you're thinking. I've actually had people kind of channel into the Atlantean times, and I don't feel 100%, comfortable like posting it, because it's like they're really like getting the messages of this. Feels very accurate of there was probably fire destruction. There's some sort of fire cataclysm, some sort of bomb going off, some sort of destruction of the civilization, and massive wiped out of everything that kind of happened. And during that time, that culture, where it seems very real to them, where I feel like these people that have asked, there's no way they could have known about Atlantis or anything like that. They're really getting this fresh take on it. And then they're saying things that correlate to many other accounts of Atlantis, about the destruction, about the sun, about things that are weird, that don't make sense. And I feel this interlays with then the whole pig thing too, circling back to the whole pig thing about not eating pork, is that it's interesting that that time period, it seems like also right after the flood time, the native cultures all didn't eat pork too, kind of also, and then also we get the story from, the Old Testament and then the Abrahamic faiths, other than, Christianity, but where those then rules are taken out. But it's interesting that then that not eating pork is such a paramount thing. And then that also in the spiritual community, that seems like people kind of get that vibe from it too, I find interesting intuitively. But going back to there's very interesting things of what people remember about. There's, do you have any, feel like you have connection to Atlantis or memories about Atlantis? I know this is a big question kind of at the end. Yeah. Memories of Atlantis, questions are like, feeling, because I have a very big connection to Atlantis. I feel like from talking to some people who have done work on me, I've definitely had past lives there. There's definitely some connection towards there. And it felt like initially it felt like a big fantasy, but then doing like, past life regressions, and then you see, then the stuff gets brought up and you're like, okay, it's like, oh, okay, what's going on here? But so I definitely have some I feel like connection to Atlantis. Do you want to, I don't know, give your take on that? You remember the destruction of Atlantis?
I not vividly, but I agree with what you're saying. Like, I feel like myself and you and a lot of people did have lifetimes or connections there in some way or another. I think a lot of what we're going through right now on a collective level is a repeating of the events and energies that we went through there and the lessons there. Like the main one being kind of coming into godlike technologies that can be used for extreme good or extreme, malevolence. And I think in Atlantean times, is very similar to today, where there's a lot of good people and then there's a lot of not so great people. I think the good people definitely outnumber the people with bad intentions, but people with bad intentions can cause a lot of damage, even if there's a small amount of them. And I think that that's what happened in those times, that things were pushed too far and taken out of the control of nature and trying to play God, basically. And I don't have any like vivid recollections, but I do feel like I was there and was a part of that. But I have had like past life recalls without assistance too. Like I've been very interested in going and getting like past life recalls and regressions and things like that. But at the same time, I wanted to challenge myself to find them on my own because I didn't want to be suggestible or impressioned
Yeah.
on potentially things that people were telling me that may or may not have been true. Although I do think a lot of it is true that people get from those. If you find the right person and they're a good person that is, not trying to impart their own will on your experience. There are some people like that, but majority I think have good intentions. And anyway, what kind of has come through for me has been lives in like civilizations that were very similar to Atlantis, but not Atlantis exactly. So like one that came through was, it felt like a lifetime somewhere in ancient Persia or the Middle East somewhere, where I was in, what today are just like ruins and relics, but a lot of those kind of symbolisms and stuff. And there were a lot of pyramids, like white pyramids is what I really remember. And that the colors were like, it was mostly like white and like a royal baby blue. And like everything was painted in this like white and royal baby blue. And I remember like looking out over this big valley of like desert, but it was like this city was like this oasis in the desert. And then there were these like pyramid. It felt very much like what people draw Atlantis like, but I could tell it wasn't Atlantis. It was like an offshoot of that, like maybe a colony after the collapse, or just a sister civilization in another part of the world, that kind of thing.
Do you think it was Egypt or?
It didn't feel like Egypt to me either. This one in particular felt like it was in, have you ever heard of a place called Persepolis in Persia? It's not talked about so much. It's one of the kind of lesser known ones, but it's something that I grew up with knowledge about. And it's basically, if you look it up, it's this ancient Persian capital that was when the Persian Empire was at its height, when they were like, if you remember that movie 300 and like the whole story about
Xerxes.
Yeah. So it was like during kind of that era when Xerxes was in power and like his kids and stuff. And that was like their capital before the Greeks came in and like basically defeated them. And time period, it's hard to tell. I feel like Atlantis was chiefly around like 12,000 years ago is the impression I get, and that a lot of researchers validate too when they do dating and stuff, and also based on Plato's accounts of it, seemed like it was about 12,000 years ago. Plato from ancient Greece talked about Atlantis and documented it. And I feel like Egypt is definitely there too, and I do feel like I had lives in Egypt, but this was different. Yeah. But very similar, like, the white pyramids in Egypt, the pyramids used to be white because they used to be covered in limestone. I think a lot of these things were like, they were really all over the planet and had very similar architecture and stuff. And even when you compare like the step pyramids, I'm sure around the world, they're very similar, like the step pyramids in like Chichen Itza or other parts of Mexico. When you compare them to like Indonesia, they're almost identical. So I think a lot of these civilizations, they were either in direct contact with each other, or they were given the same blueprints by, the ETs or whoever were visiting them and helping them with that information at that time. And so they built similar things, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it's both. I think it's both. Yeah. There was a kind of a global seafaring civilization, and we're all, I think, there was a lot of good information being passed down for people to be empowered, how we're talking about with XRP and stuff like that, a modern version of that, where unfortunately, a lot of that has been, I think, lost in a sense, where people don't, have that same, deep connection,
Yeah, but it's coming back. It's like this. It's the revival period is what it feels like. Like, it really is biblical times that we're living in. And I think that we're going to start seeing biblical level miracles happening on a mass scale, where it'll be undeniable to a lot of people.
Expand on that. I want to think, like, what do you foresee in the future about happening, because a lot of this feels very end timesy from a biblical perspective. It feels very end timesy with Mark of the Beast slash, maybe false prophet type of things, and dark ruling stuff. Like it seems very dark.
Well, yeah, like
but,
from a biblical perspective,
mhm.
you could say end timesy, but I feel like it's more positive. Like I think we're going to see biblical events as in like expressions of God's energy on this earth plane that could only be from God and the angelic realms and things like
Yeah.
that. Like I don't even want to like really guess what it could be, but what I think of is like, in like the biblical accounts of like what God was doing with Moses in Egypt, and like like the plagues that were sent, but like the frogs and like things that were just like
Too unreal to fathom.
like
Yeah.
peace of God. And not to say that like it has to do with anything as far as people dying or anything like that. But like the frog thing within itself was kind of interesting, because like Pepe the Frog and that whole thing, have you heard about that, like how that correlates? Like it's kind of like the resurfacing of the invasion of the frogs in the Bible. Now we have all these frogs and like memes, and then Kek is what the frog says, and Kek is actually an ancient Egyptian frog god. So there's like
so there's this weird psychic correlation that's playing out. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like the god of like chaos and like mischief, I think, and stuff. So it's kind of like what the memes are almost. So things like that, but I think they're going to get more prominent. Like just I think this financial shift will be a big part of it. It'll be like something that will just really blow people's minds on a good level, where the amount of abundance that people are going to come into and the shifts that people now or 5 years ago would have been like, that's not possible. Like, I just don't see how that could happen. Like, how can we go from it feeling this bad to being this good? So I do think that there's going to be struggles too. Like there will, we're already kind of seeing this issue with the population potentially reaching a tipping point, maybe a population collapse, the whole like issue with, I don't want to say the trigger words, but like the, people kind of spontaneously dying and things like that.
Yeah. But the no, I know what there's I think two interesting things with the population. I think there's a lot of countries like India, I think just became the biggest country in the world as an example, and then places like Nigeria in a couple of years will become a lot of the biggest places in the world. But there is, I think, just openly statistically, there's places, thinking about Italy, there's places that are literally being abandoned. There's cities that are being abandoned because no one will live there, because it's so there is a regardless of trigger words, we'll just say there is I think a big population decline, but in countries like Japan, these big countries, but then there's a lot of old population too that the young aren't going to take care of. So it's going to be interesting, where I have no idea how the population map's going to play out, and especially in some of these countries that have traditionally had tons of kids, but then they're typically called third world countries, but then they basically now, if you had 8 kids, a few would unfortunately pass away just from disease, malnourishment, things like that. Since there's such good infrastructure now in these third world countries, whatever you want to say, they're not dying now. So now you're having usual populations where you'd have 8 kids, but only 3 would survive. Now they're all 8 are surviving, or 9 are surviving, and then you're just seeing these massive population increases in places like Nigeria and Africa and stuff like that. And then in India too, there's massive population increases. So we're going to definitely see some weird population shifts, where countries like Italy and Japan are going to have very low populations, but then simultaneously we're going to see exponential growth in some countries. But depending on the health of certain regions and populations, it's going to be definitely interesting to see how that plays out, and that'll affect obviously the financial market too, and how everything's going to interplay. I think that's a big mystery that population definitely plays into the financial market, and that one's again too weird, touchy and predict.
Well, just and to
but
bring that kind of full circle too,
Mhm.
there's a group called the BRICS nations. Have you heard of that?
I haven't.
So that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Okay.
They're like an economic alliance, and they call themselves BRICS.
Okay.
And they've been around for like decades, I'm pretty sure, at least a decade or two, but they're becoming a stronger group now, especially with the collapse of like the dollar and stuff.
Mhm.
And so what they've done is they've announced that they're introducing a new global reserve currency to replace the dollar and the petrodollar. And it's going to be a gold backed, precious metal backed, so gold, silver, copper, a basket currency, meaning it's going to be a new currency that is like based on the value of all those nations' individual national currencies. And this is what they're saying they're going to replace the dollar with. So, these are like the biggest nations in the world next to the United States in population, power, and social influence, mainly Brazil, Russia, India, China.
Mhm.
And now we're seeing tons of other smaller countries like Saudi Arabia trying to join the BRICS nations. And so this is part of this big shift that I'm seeing where I think that China, Brazil, Russia, they're all going through similar kinds of civil unrests and restructuring like we've been going through. And I feel in my heart and believe that the positive is going to win in each of these places. And instead of having like one of these groups trying to rule the rest of the world, that we're really going to move into more of this collaborative sphere. And again, like, no, there won't be one currency to rule them all. It'll be like each of these countries will still have their national currencies. They'll have this, new reserve currency that is like not owned by any one group, but like, everybody has a part in. And that's where I see XRP really playing a key role as the means of trade where, XRP is not owned by any one nation. So it doesn't have control. It's decentralized, and they all will use it to trade with each other and create international commerce. And I think it's going to help unify these countries and these superpowers into, escalating or de-escalating out of the World War III era.
Yeah. And then I guess just finally the gold and silver, you a big pro to that? Because I mean, you can't like fake it. I have silver rings on, gold.
Yeah, I know. I'm wearing a gold
Yeah.
ring.
I saw. I was like,
Yeah.
we precious metals. We're I guess supporters of. That's good.
Yeah, I love precious metals. I own a little bit, not a ton, mainly because I feel like from an investment perspective, although they're great and I think they're going to do well for anyone that's invested in them, I feel like XRP and the other digital assets have a better investment return overall in the long term.
They have these huge potential returns where
Yeah.
not like gold is going to be very actually stagnant, which is a good thing, but XRP has these major gain potentials depending how reality plays out.
Yeah, and how early you get in, what price and everything you get in. So that's where I'm at. But I love gold and silver, and I think that there's alchemical benefits to those that, as I'm sure like when you wear them, when you use them, they're crystals, they're like minerals, they're alive, like they've got intelligence to them, and you can play off that and use that in your life, and it's fun.
Yeah, we're definitely, man. That's a great way, I think, to end this. Thank you so much for being on my show. I think it was an honor to have you. Thank you so much. And I'll link your YouTube in the comment section. So if anyone wants to go follow you, and I'll link your Instagram too if you want.
Perfect.
Your YouTube channel. Awesome. Thank you again.
And then if anyone wants to, I've got a free class out that people can watch. Join.consciouscrypto.info is my website, and I'll send it to you so you can throw it in the description too. But if anybody watching wants to go see a free class, dive kind of deeper into this stuff, you can check it out. And then if you want to work with me too and join my coaching program, you can do that on my website too. So
nice. Awesome, man. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me on so much. It was so much fun. Pleasure. Peace.